countries of Southeast Asia. We will take steps to develop relationships with Arab world countries. Traditionally, the CSTO actively cooperated with the OSCE, but over the last few years, not upon our initiative, the relationships between the CSTO and the OSCE were put on hold. But recently, a meeting happened between the Secretary Generals of the OSCE and CSTO in Vienna, just recently, where an agreement was achieved to resume contacts on different areas, including matters of fighting terrorism and other particular matters regarding the military component. The conversation took place in a friendly manner. The parties demonstrated mutual interest. We'll proceed on that. And of course, for the CSTO, the UN remains one of the most important partners. We actively cooperate on matters of challenges, threats, and peacekeeping activities. So our relationships with these international organizations directly influence the shaping of the new Eurasian architecture of security, indivisible and equal. As the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, said, security matters of individual countries cannot be solved at the expense of other countries. So these are the directions we're going to work in.
So I would like to add, there is such an organization as NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that is also showing interest not only to its own area of responsibility, NATO's area of responsibility, but it is interested in the entire Eurasian continent. And the previous Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, when answering a question about why NATO is deploying its military architecture in the Indo-Pacific region, as they call Eurasia, and why NATO is promoting military alliances of restricted format in the territory that is far away from the borders of the NATO bloc. And the answer was simple: yes, the main goal for us is ensuring security of the NATO member countries, but under the current circumstances, the threat to our security is coming from the South China Sea, from the Taiwan Strait, from the Southeast and Northeast Asia. So when we speak about the need to get united, the countries of the continent, to discuss how we can build reliable, equal, indivisible security for everyone. NATO, an organization that is encompassing a different region, North Atlantic region, and they were always saying that they are concerned for the security of its member states. For some years now, it's trying to ensure its Eurasian security the way they see it, the way they deem it right, under their guidance. So we have already started this conversation today, or rather, we have continued with this conversation today, and we agreed to hold a special meeting to think about how we can work with this matter, considering that this autumn we are going to hold the 4th International Security in Minsk, and it will be dedicated to the matters of the Eurasian security, among other things. And the CSTO was always open for dialogue with the NATO as well. Back then, when there were no crises in the relations between Russia and the West, back when we had the Russian-NATO Council, and we discussed the helicopter deliveries to Afghanistan to counter terrorism there. We had an entire cooperation program between Russia and NATO. Even back then, NATO has never agreed to sit down with the CSTO representatives to discuss the security matters. And the only place where these two organizations were next each other was the OSCE plenary sessions, or back when the UN held various meetings with regional organizations in the field of security, but there was no equality, there was no equity, there was no equal dialogue, despite many proposals made by the CSTO heads of state. It was put on paper and it was sent to the NATO headquarters. You know, it was arrogant silence that they responded with. And this is the mentality of the West in relation of everything that is happening in the world. Zvezda TV channel, please. Good afternoon. Zvezda TV channel. Mr. Lavrov, today we saw that there was no representative of Armenia, and recently during the presidential campaign, Nikol Pashinyan said that it's possible that we will leave CSTO. I'm quoting him well, we will leave the CSTO. Need be, we will decide for ourselves. Was this sensitive issue discussed during today's meeting? And your view, what position has formed among our partners in the CSTO? And most importantly, what retaliatory mechanisms could be triggered if the authorities in Yerevan make such a decision? This is true. Armenia did not participate in this event, in this CSTO event, once again. Even though technically it remains a full-fledged member, Armenia's national flag is there next to the other CSTO member states. And of course, one would like to draw a parallel with how Armenia treats its participation in the Eurasian Economic Union and its participation at the Collective Security Treaty Organization. We remember that when Mr. Nikol Pashinyan was entering the world of big politics, he established his movement that was called the Exit, if you translate it from Armenian. And they did not hide it back then, that this movement has a goal to exit, to withdraw from all the organizations established at the post-Soviet area, including the organizations that include former Soviet republics. And you probably follow what is happening in relation with all these discussions around the Eurasian Economic Union. President Putin spoke about it during the Supreme Council of the Eurasian Economic Union. He mentioned this, and we can see what was the reaction from Yerevan. In particular, there were statements, well, similar, akin to what you've just quoted, that we have not made any decisions, and I would like to raise a question, but we have not raised it yet. But this question, this matter is not up to me, it's up to the people of Armenia. It will be decided during a referendum, whatever they will choose, the membership at the Eurasian Economic Union or the European Union. But so far, they are saying we are not speaking about withdrawing from the Eurasian Economic Union because we have not entered the European Union yet. But they have adopted a law on entering the European Union. So this question is becoming urgent, actually, and President Putin mentioned this, and members of the Russian government have commented on this, both of them who are dealing with matters of the economy. And the decision needs to be made promptly. Not because we do not respect the choice of the Armenian people. We would like to know what choice they made, because otherwise it will be impossible to implement this law on entering the European Union and maintaining its place in the Eurasian Economic Union, because the norms of these two organizations, of these two unions, they contradict each other, they exclude each other, tariffs, phytosanitary rules, and many other things. And we are not speaking here about disrespecting the interests of Armenia, but about showing the respect to the will of the Armenian people as soon as possible, to make sure that these people, the Armenian people, they can still choose, not just face a fact determined by someone else. As for the CSTO, no one is mentioning any referenda in this regard, but technically, being a member and not participating in the CSTO events, I think it's for more than 2 years our Armenian counterparts are not attending these events, and at the same time they are developing relations with the NATO members, they're holding military exercises, they're procuring military material from them, they're developing ties with NATO and with the European Union that is turning into a militarized entity as well. And on June 7th, my counterpart, when the elections in Armenia were held, my counterpart, Minister Mirzayan, answering the question about the CSTO, said we are not paying any fees because we are not participating. I'm quoting him almost literally. I believe he said it on June 7th. And what we do? We discussed this today, and the debt of Armenia in front of the CSTO, it's been accumulating for 2 years, and these situations are described in our documents, and we discussed enforcing some of the articles of the CSTO Charter today. Interfax Agency, Minister Lavrov, good afternoon. I've got a question for you. Recently, there was a Security Secretary Council, Defense Ministers Council, Foreign Ministers Council took place today. How could you summarize the outcomes of its work?
Well, I think in our introductory speeches we covered that quite well. We're not present at the Ministry of Defense session and at the Secretaries of Security Council session, but their agenda is well known. They all cover their work extensively, but the general vector of the work we tried our best to cover today. If I may, Minister Lavrov, I will add that the Committee of Secretaries of the Security Council took place on the 26th of May, and the Ministers of Defense gathered on the 3rd of June. And these two meetings were mostly devoted to military affairs and to ways of using mechanisms, the organization's mechanisms to combat new and emerging threats. The CSTO continues its work aimed at ensuring collective security, involving efforts and means of member states. The organization, the CSTO, is working along 3 tracks. That's practical cooperation, ensuring military security, and countering threats and challenges. So the 2 previous meetings were devoted to these matters. A number of very serious documents were signed, which shows that there is certain unanimous approach to dealing with matters of military security and countering threats and challenges. That's developing collective air force of the CSTO, creating mobile air defense units. You know that soldiers of our countries study in special schools in Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Also, a list of new military professions was added for those military schools. These are the matters that were reviewed during the sessions. This is becoming a necessity for all of us. New forms and kinds of warfare in different conflicts have shown the relevance of tackling tasks related to cybersecurity, countering unmanned aerial systems. We have exchanged experience on new reconnaissance, intelligence gathering systems, radio electronic warfare. So these matters were discussed, and a number of serious documents were signed. Of course, the Russian Federation has accumulated significant experience of conducting warfare in a special military operation, and our special authorities and military authorities asked for ways of exchanging experience. So briefly, these matters were discussed at the Security Council Secretaries meeting and Defense Ministers meeting. RT, please.
Здравствуйте, Антон Клеро, телеканал РТ на французском языке. Вопрос к вам, Сергей Викторович.
This is a question to you, Minister Lavrov. Finnish President Alexander Stubb stated that Europe should begin negotiations with Russia, with the European Union serving as the initiator. And if that fails, the Euro trio should step in. How do you assess the prospects for peaceful dialogue with the EU as a whole, and with the proposed Euro trio in particular? Do you think there is a fundamental difference between these two formats, or are they essentially the same thing? Well, recently all eyes have been on European Union's attempts at taking the limelight in the center stage in the efforts to settle, or what they think is settling, the Ukrainian conflict, and generally at boosting their presence on the international arena. And President Putin said that once again at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum last week. We have never shied away from dialogue. If the EU is sincere in its desire to settle the conflict, they've had plenty of such chances, and they failed every one of them, starting with the EU leaders, Germany and France, together with Poland, who were guarantors of agreements in February 2014 between President Yanukovych and the opposition. They guaranteed back then on paper the agreement that no force will be used, that there will be no demonstrations, no Maidans, and that a national unity government will be established to prepare a national election within a few months. They guaranteed that the very next morning the opposition barged into government buildings, seized the president, and said, "Congratulate us, we have created the government of victors." Just previously they had signed under the EU guarantees, and the next day they seized the government. And when we asked the EU to bring them back to the treatments, the EU sheepishly evaded the answer, mumbling something along the lines of democracy sometimes taking surprising turns and twists. And then the EU, represented by the same Germany and France, they had an opportunity that we thought everybody used. The Minsk treaties, the Minsk agreements, very long negotiations in the capital of Belarus, which resulted in a specific document that was supposed to solve all issues and was approved by the EU Security Council. Then it turned out that Germany and France didn't give a damn about the Security Council, because shortly thereafter Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Hollande agreed that nobody was actually intending to adhere to that paper, that state leaders had spent almost a day agreeing and ratifying. They were just winning time to pump more weapons and armaments into the Nazi Ukrainian regime armament against the Russian Federation. And just recently, in the beginning of the special military operation in Istanbul, upon proposition of the Ukraine, a document was agreed and ratified and signed to stop hostilities. That document was supposed to become the foundation for a final agreement, but the West, this time represented by Britain and to an extent France, the President said about that in detail in St. Petersburg, just forbade them to sign the paper. Well, as I said, it was all about Germany, France, and the Great Britain, because Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, came to Kiev and told them not to sign the Istanbul document in April 2022. So all three participants of the so-called Euro trio had their chance to step on stage and failed spectacularly. This is no secret, probably. I will report that ambassadors of those countries, the Great Britain, France and Germany, have been requesting meetings with my deputy. We will have that meeting, we will listen to what they have to say, and it will be interesting to hear those people say anything that could lead to any constructive thoughts after their leaders, their superiors, those ambassadors Merz, Starmer and Macron had said absolutely insulting things about the Russian Federation, making very personal remarks many times. Do you know what Merz said recently? We must suppress Russia, otherwise we will end up with the repetition of pacifying Hitler. What do you think of this message from a German chancellor? Well, I'm not very optimistic, but we are always ready, we're always willing to listen. I doubt very much that these three ambassadors or three ministers, if they were together there, will say anything different from what was said in the documents of this Euro trio after they gathered with Zelensky in London, demanding Russia essentially to capitulate. If we take the European Union as a union, that was also part of your question, I think. If we choose partners on the other side of the table, what's the difference between the Euro trio and the European Union? I think the European Union has a military staff, and that military staff has a superior, and I have a quote right in front of me. He said a couple months ago, a strong Ukrainian army is necessary for the European Union. Security guarantees for Ukraine must provide for restoration of its military power with the aim of solving tasks on the Eastern Front. Is it about negotiations or about making the war last forever? European leaders have said many times that the entire policy towards Russian Federation, all the sanctions, must fully remain even after the settlement. And they see settlement as stopping hostilities to prevent the Zelensky army from being overwhelmed and give the rest of Ukraine security guarantees while deploying the so-called stabilization force. Even Germany is ready to join those occupation troops. In other words, the goal is not to change the regime that they had led to power once, which is an example of neo-Nazi racist regime that suppresses human rights and freedoms in Russian language and the Orthodox Church. We all know that very well. It's the violation of everything there is, including the UN Charter and the Constitution of Ukraine. They don't give a damn about that Constitution, making laws that directly contradict it. So however you arrange it, be it Euro Trio, European Union, or individually, well, this is a well-known situation. Miracles do happen, of course, but I very much doubt that with the current European Union there can be any miracle. By the way, Alexander Stubb, that you quoted, who you say speaks about the need for a dialogue, he said a lot before that. He said a lot of anti-Russian things before that, as if there had been no decades of good relationships between Russia and Finland, as if Russia had not played any role in ensuring Finland's statehood. So besides the ideas that you mentioned, he also said the following when speaking about the future of NATO. We, he said, are going back to the roots of the alliance, and that is a collective system of deterring Russia. He's so fresh in the NATO, but he already realizes that NATO was an alliance that was created to hold back first the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation, and that all talks of partnership are just disguise. So I don't see any difference. And before we really see that we have heard any serious propositions and not another attempt to save and strengthen the Nazi Kiev regime. Well, we will listen to that. But practically, I don't see any practical perspective in this. But from the point of view of evaluating the actions of our neighbors, I would just learn more about them and what they are.
Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. You mentioned hospitality of Tatarstan. This is not the first time Kazan has become a venue for CSTO events. Military exercises took place here, and now we see the meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs. And how do you assess the suitability of this city, and what can you say about Kazan? We chose Kazan because it's a comfortable city, a welcoming city. And why? It's welcoming. We've mentioned that under the leadership of the current head of the Republic, Mr. Minnikhanov, the Republic has become truly one of the development centers, one of the Russia's calling cards. So Russia has many faces, so to say, and Tatarstan is one of its faces, so to say. So apart from the CSTO events, Kazan is hosting a great number of international fora last year, or in 2024 it hosted the BRICS summit. I believe it was in 2024, right? And it opened up a path for other countries to join it, so the BRICS expansion took place there. And a lot of events is taking place in Tatarstan, in the capital of Tatarstan. And Tatarstan, it's preserving its cultural legacy, and in Kazan Kremlin there is a mosque, dozen meters from Orthodox Church, and it symbolizes this unity of religions, of civilizations, of cultures. So it is a model, it is an example of what we strive to achieve when we speak about Eurasian security and cooperation architecture, the dialogue between civilizations, agreement between civilizations. That's what we aim for. So it is a magnet for all those who want to see some beautiful locations and see a city that symbolizes the history of our state, the history of the Eurasian continent even. If we look at the things in broader sense, if we think of the ancient times. So I would like to thank everyone who helped make Kazan and the Republic the way it is now, and it's very gladdening to see that it's becoming better and better with each year. I would like to add a couple of words to what Minister Lavrov has said about Kazan and Tatarstan's hospitality. I come from Kyrgyzstan, from Central Asia myself, and I can say that I've visited Kazan and Tatarstan a few times now, and you can truly feel this warm, brotherly hospitality. The city is developing, it's progressing, it's moving forward. It's a beautiful city. And seizing this opportunity, I would like to thank the head of the Republic of Tatarstan, the leadership of Tatarstan, for organizing this Foreign Ministers' Council at the greatest level. When you come here, you want to keep coming, and I'm saying this openly. And hospitality is even greater than Central Asian countries' hospitality. So thank you so much, Tatarstan, the Russian Federation, for organizing the Foreign Ministers' Council at such a great level. Thank you. We are concluding the press conference. Thank you.